And so today's sermon, as I said, was actually written 10 years ago in a different place, in a different time, with different events going on, and yet many, many things don't change. And so Peter has masterfully reworked, particularly the second half of this, to be really relevant and timely for us in this church. So the sermon is entitled Advice to Sheila. I received an interesting email message from a fellow Unitarian Universalist a while back. Its title was On Sheilaism, UUism, and Spirituality. It directed me to a book called Habits of the Heart by Robert Bellah and 4 others. I don't know if you know Habits of the Heart. It made quite a splash when it came out in 1985, at least in some quarters. Its subtitle is Individualism and Commitment in American Life. It has chapters on the pursuit of happiness, finding oneself, love and marriage, reaching out, individualism, getting involved, citizenship, and religion, among other topics. The book examines what it means to be an American, both as an individual and as a member of the society, and how we each function in each of these roles, what it means for each to shape the other, and in the end, it talks about how we can integrate these aspects in ways to produce healthier individuals and a more vibrant society. The chapter on religion holds special interest for me, and I hope for us today. This is where the idea of Sheilaism is mentioned. Bellah and his co-authors understand the earliest expression of religion by our Puritan forebears to be public and unified. It provided a way for the community to be united and gave it a center around which public life could develop and be coherent. The difficulty, of course, is that it repressed the development of healthy individualism, the sense that we each own a piece of the truth, and in free expression gain an opportunity to deepen religious understanding throughout the community of believers. The critique by Habits of the Heart, in this instance, though, is to point out that there can be such a thing as too individualistic a religious understanding or a faith understanding. The 5 authors of the book engaged in extensive interviews on a number of subjects and presented their findings under the various topics that I mentioned. One of the interviewees in the religion section goes by the pseudonym of Sheila Larson. She is described as a young nurse who has received a good deal of therapy, probably not physical, and who describes her faith as Sheilaism. I believe in God. I'm not a religious fanatic. I can't remember the last time I went to church. My faith has carried me a long way. It's Sheilaism, just my own little voice. In defining my own Sheilaism, she said, it's just try to love yourself and be gentle with yourself. You know, I guess take care of each other. I think he would want us to take care of each other. For a person to name her faith after herself, Bellah states, suggests the logical possibility of over 220 million American religions, one for each of us. This was in 1985. Today, such an understanding would imply 352 million different religions. That's something to mull over in itself. He asks, how do we get to the point where Anne Hutchinson, 17th century precursor of Sheila Larson's, could be run out of Massachusetts Bay Colony to a situation where Anne Hutchinson is close to the norm? Well, this is not merely a rhetorical question, but the explanation is too lengthy to go into here in very much detail. Bellah is speaking here of what he calls radical religious individualism, which makes claims of dramatic self-realization. He contrasts it to a resurgent religious conservatism that spells out clear, if simple, answers in an increasingly bewildering world. Is there something in the middle, something that does not glorify the kind of spiritual self-exploration that leads only to radical religious individualism? That leads to spiritual isolation and what Martin Marty, the liberal Christian theologian, calls religious tribalism, where we can identify with something larger than ourselves, but only if it allows us to view ourselves as a kind of tribe at war with other tribes that see the world differently. Marty envisions a middle of what he calls the public church, which is a kind of federation or at least community of various Christian churches and their non-Christian counterparts, as offering the major alternatives in our culture to these opposing inclinations. Such a public church welcomes the opportunity for conversation and sometimes even joint action to address issues which lead to the common good. Bella suggests that for church members willing to work together with members of other churches, religion provides a conception, even if it is rudimentary, of how one should live. All such churches, he says, share the idea that one's obligation to God involves one's life at work as well as in the family, what one does as a citizen as well as how one treats one's friends. But how can this be accomplished when, as Bella suggests, each of these communities has suffered to some degree from a therapeutic thinning out of belief and practice, a withdrawal into the narrow boundaries of the religious community itself? There needs to be both a sense of continuity with the past and an engagement with the public world of the present. For us, as Unitarians and Universalists, capturing a sense of continuity with the past means having a better theological understanding of our Christian heritage. It means grappling with terms such as God and Christ and the historical Jesus, thinking out if the term salvation retains any meaning for us, thinking through what we mean when we say worship. This may be quite a challenge for us, but if we truly believe that we need roots as well as wings, I think we will dedicate ourselves to this challenge. Let's look at the idea of martyrs that I referred to a minute ago. Churches, he says, share the idea that one's obligation to God involves one's life at work as well as in the family, what one does as a citizen as well as how one treats one's friends. If I believe that I have an obligation to God, I do not envision that obligation to be to an old, wise, all-knowing, all-powerful man who lives in the sky, someone who watches my every move and subjects it to judgment, someone who will save me if I obey certain commandments and will condemn me if I do not. Instead, I view God as that which gives meaning and substance to the universe. I am exquisitely aware that the planet that I live in is but a tiny dot in a universe so vast that it is incomprehensible. So I don't expect my understanding of God to be commensurate with my understanding of the universe. That cannot concern me as an essential question. At the same time, it does not allow me to dismiss the universe as irrelevant. I need to find my place in that universe, which means that I have to make sense, not of the workings of the entire universe with its dark matter and dark energy and black holes and interstellar space, but the workings of just this planet we call the Earth and its surrounding atmosphere. And even that is necessary only to the extent that it determines the conditions of my life and those organisms which share that biosphere. I don't have to understand the workings of all those organisms either. Instead, I need to achieve an understanding of the whole of which I am but a small part. Knowing that the natural world is what makes possible the achievement of civilization, I hold it in a place of honor, of reverence. I understand God as that animating force behind all existence, the answer to why rather than the answer to how. In line with Unitarian Universalist acknowledgement, I believe in the direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which sustain and uphold life. I also believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, though I find that belief tested often enough when I hear reports of Egyptian militia mowing down hundreds of unarmed civilians, when I hear the details of a nightmare massacre by a sergeant in the U.S. Army of innocent women and children in an Afghan village. I try to remember that inherent means something different than apparent or even actual. I join with other members of the Unitarian Universalist congregation in covenanting to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, even though I see those values as holding a minority position in a world and a society that values the use of force to achieve the power to control others and what are considered to be valuable resources. When Sheila Larson says that she tries to be gentle with herself, and to treat others well, I find that I am in agreement with her. Whether or not a personal God wants that for us, my sense of what is right leads me in that direction. My ability to see in the suffering of others my own suffering mirrored. My sense of compassion for others, rising out of observation and a sense of empathy, pulls me in that direction. I have no argument with the tenets of Sheilaism, vague as they are. I just don't think they are enough. Yes, I believe it is essential to be gentle with myself in a world that can make demands on me that I find oppressive and often dehumanizing. But I believe also that I must do more than that. In Robert Bella's discussion of religion, he examines various churches, mostly in the Christian tradition, some of which emphasize the meaning of faith in the lives of individuals, some of which emphasize the centrality of the church's traditions or its thinking, some which strike an admirable balance. In his discussion of St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, he says, "For all the parish's many activities, it is the life of worship that is the center. The Book of Common Prayer provides a pattern for liturgy that is continuous with the practices of worship from the early centuries of the Church. Holy Communion is celebrated daily and 3 times on Sunday, with more than half the parish attending at least once a week. The liturgical year is taken seriously. The rector of the church believes that for those who come regularly, worship becomes a genuine source of life and of focusing what they do during the week. He is genuinely touched by the power of communion because his people have brought their life, the heart of their life, to the communion rail, and they hold it up and find healing and comfort and walk away somehow renewed, restored, and fit for another week in a pretty tough world." Father Morrison, the rector of this church, goes on to say, "The concept that a community can set standards, adopt values, capture conscience, and become authoritative in the life of human beings is not obvious in our culture, and it falls apart without it. When individuation is more important than community, people are not together enough to take on the responsibilities of authority. Further, Father Morrison believes that only a spiritually strong parish can really support individuals in their difficult worldly callings. They need workshops and discussions, but they also need inner resources." What has all of this got to do with us, the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Middleboro, Massachusetts? I think Father Morrison is right when he states that the life of worship is at the center of church life. Worship, as I've said before, means something different to Unitarian Universalists than it does to most other Christians. When I refer to worship, I refer to holding high those things which we hold to have most value. Our 7 principles are often at the center of our worship. When members of our worship committee contact persons outside of the church to ask them to deliver a message on a Sunday morning, I expect that they inform them that the presentation is to focus on at least one of our principles. When I refer to worship, I recognize the various sources which inform our tradition. Our worship service, like that of the Episcopalians, is conducted in the form of a liturgy that has come to us from centuries of Christian worship. We sing hymns, we alternate the hymns with readings. A minister delivers a sermon based most often on written texts, though we don't often refer to them as sacred. We end with a benediction. There is no Eucharist to anchor the service, but we come together as one community each Sunday service centered on a message that encourages the spiritual growth of the individual and the social cohesion of the community. It is no exaggeration to say that I love our Sunday worship service. I think it does many of the things that a worship service should do, honoring a meaningful tradition, giving form to the Spirit in liturgy, actualizing a sense that there is sanctuary from a world of too many demands and distractions, and holding us together in a community that some of us call beloved. One way to encourage the spiritual growth of each individual is to offer a learning ministry in small groups. In the past, this church has offered a course called Building Your Own Theology. In the cottage meetings recently concluded, several members stated that they would like this course to be offered again, as it has been several years since it has been offered. Others requested that a course be taught in Unitarian or Universalist history, so that we better understand who we are as a religious, spiritual tradition and how we came to be who we are today. The theology course would focus on the growth of the individual. The history course would focus on the movement as a whole. I am content to lead a small group on either topic. Perhaps one can be offered after the other. We can work together to integrate our individual understandings into a long-standing and dynamic tradition. There are sign-up sheets in the parlor table. I invite all who are interested to choose a topic and sign up at the conclusion of the service. Soon we will begin a discussion about church growth. We have talked about what this Sunday service means to us, how we value it, and how we wish we could make it more available to those who don't know about us or who don't feel there's room enough here to get to know us in a manner comfortable to them. We need to feel in the presence of beloved community, to feel that our worship is shaped by a room steeped in tradition, graced by wonderful music, illumined by the glowing faces of those who sit in these pews. There is a need for spiritual nourishment that comes in the form of a spiritual or religious experience on a Sunday morning, an opportunity for, if you will, transformation, for the participants to feel that the experience of the worship service has left them changed in some fundamental way, something like what Father Morrison describes can happen at the communion rail. The clearer an understanding that we have of our own theological views, and the better we know our history, the more prepared we will all be for a meaningful experience when we meet each Sunday morning, and the better we can welcome those with whom we hope will find their way to join us for our worship services, social events, and opportunities for education and spiritual growth.